So what's your favorite weapon then?
Oh, isn't it obvious?
Is it your head?
No, it's my right-hand man here on my right-hand side who I pick up with my right hand and hit the monsters.
I am very hard.
He's a great blunt weapon. Ladies, gentlemen, and
Monsters of all ages, now that we're a good 6 months into the life cycle of Monster Hunter Wilds, I have played a frankly unhealthy amount of the game, including putting time into every single weapon there is, and expanding past Wilds itself. The weapons as a whole are one of the two biggest factors of enjoyment for most people with the Monster Hunter series, with the other main one being the monsters. So today, with Wilds now 6 months deep and even having a pseudo new weapon in the Akuma fistfighting playstyle, I want to look back and make a tier list of every weapon type in the history of the series based on my own opinions of how much I like them. This isn't about their performance, their strength, and it isn't meant to reflect the average person's views either. It's entirely what I feel about them personally, about their enjoyment. Every weapon on the list will be judged by its most recent version, meaning that all of the main weapons will be judged by their Monster Hunter Wilds iteration instead of earlier versions, and we'll be including weapons from spin-offs like Frontier or Monster Hunter Explorer as well, just to really hit every weapon that has existed. And an extra caveat that I will be judging all of these weapons against each other. No weapon made for a Monster Hunter game is a bad weapon design. I fully believe that they are all at minimum cool and well executed weapons. It's something the series is just known for. But for something to be S tier on this list, something else has to be D tier. So I'm not saying the D tier weapons are bad, they are just below the average of my own rankings. That said, let's begin with something funky in medium bowgun, which I've got all the way at the bottom as my only D tier entry. This was an extremely specific concept that only existed in the base game of Monster Hunter Tri, not even in 3 Ultimate or Portable Third. In this game, there was a system where you could create your bowgun from different parts, and by doing so, the parts you used decided if it was a light or heavy bowgun. But because of how the system worked, if you put something in between these two extremes, you would end up with something unique, the medium bowgun, a genuine middle ground between these two options that is slower and less mobile than light bowgun, but does more damage. The main reason that I have this where I do is that it's just really outdated and simple. The main comparisons would of course be the other two bowguns, but given that I'm counting their Wilds versions for this tier list, a 3rd generation bowgun is just extremely limited in comparison and moveset and function. I think the idea of creating a bowgun from multiple parts that defines how it works is very cool, but if you put all of the weapon options in front of me and told me to hunt a monster and choose one of them, this would be my last choice of one to actually use. Bouncing up to the very top in the S+ tier then, let's get the obvious one from me out of the way, because you all know what it'll be, it's Hammer. I absolutely adore Hammer. I always have since the first version of the weapon that I tried back in Monster Hunter World, but while I really enjoyed Hammer at the start of Monster Hunter Wilds, the experience using the weapon since the patch that happened back in May has been unbelievable. Having 3 separate offset options in the moveset, 2 of which can combo together super quickly, it makes any fight that has lots of physical attacks feel incredible and comfortable to do. The big bonk from Mighty Charge Slam is incredible. The amount of moveset that the weapon has, just so many different options and ways for it to flow into each other, it is just totally unique, and it is the most satisfying way of playing the game, in my opinion, just full stop. Next up, let's break open the C tier with heavy bowgun. And a lot of my feelings here do apply to light bowgun as well, but I do think that light bowgun has some slightly better features as well. My main thing here with the bowguns is that I just find the gameplay relatively stale. There's the special ammo, which is basically one type of attack. There's regular gun firing, and while there are different ammo types, they still pretty much play very similarly to each other, except that you of course change up the range that you're firing at and the places at the monster you're aiming. But that's pretty much it. Of course, there's a lot more depth going on with the weapon than that. That's a very simplified explanation, but that's why I feel the way that I do. Just in comparison to the melee weapons, I generally find the ranged weapons, bowguns especially, and specifically heavy bowgun the most, to be a little bit boring. They do good damage, which can be fun for its own reason, but I just don't find the actual gameplay all that enjoyable, and I don't think that Wilds has fixed that a whole lot. Immediately moving on to light bowgun then, I have up in the B tier, which is essentially the middle of the pack average quality weapons in my opinion. I have similar problems with this weapon that I do to heavy bowgun, except that it has a bit more going on with the rapid fire gauge and the evading rapid fire attack, and I feel like that just puts it a step above heavy bowgun, 1 tier up without a doubt, but I still don't really enjoy playing it that much more than any of the other melee weapons that I have in this tier. After that, let's polish off our only other C tier entry, Prowler mode from Generations and Generations generation's ultimate. And hear me out, put the pitchforks down. I think as a concept, as an idea, Prowler mode is awesome. I love the idea of being able to play as our companions. I love the fact that they even have a totally different health and healing mechanic compared to when you are playing as a hunter, but there just isn't as much going on with the moveset as there is with the actual proper weapons in the series. It was a fun sort of like a vacation, a break from normal hunts, but I would never consider becoming a Prowler main myself personally, unless they drastically change the way that it functions. By which I mean, yay, they could totally bring back Prowler mode in a future game and make me eat my socks on this one, but this is how I feel right now. Moving back up to the B tier then, let's talk about the Lance. This has moved up from where I had it in my early Wilds tier list when I was around 250 hours into the game. Now I've got nearly triple that time. I've spent a fair few more hunts playing Lance than I did back then, and I found the enjoyment from the weapon that I was missing then. The weapon is not merely guarding and poking. The charge counter is a ton of fun to play around, and using Power Guard and Grand Retribution Thrust is really enjoyable too. And the fun of the weapon comes from learning what attacks from the monster are good to counter against, which ones are worth charging against, which moments you instead want to be just like spamming out pokes for damage in between, and the idea of Lance is constant damage, but in much more creative ways than it has been in a lot of previous games in the series. It's not my favorite weapon by any means, but I am happy with it enough to have it in the B tier for now. Next up, let's talk about another weapon from the series that is not in Monster Hunter Wilds, which is the Accel axe down in the B tier. This weapon is exclusive to Monster Hunter Explore, a mobile game spin-off, and to put it simply, it is an axe the size of the hammer. It has thrusters on the back of it that makes it work sort of like the rocket-powered greatsword. I think it looks cool, the concept is neat, I think it works well in Explore, the game that it came from, but I have no desperate need for this one to return in a main series game. It could have a potential niche now that Gunlance isn't flying around the way that they were in Sunbreak, as you could make Accel Axe the weapon that rocket boosts around as its movement, but for the most part, I struggle to see its moveset being that different from what we have for Hammer right now, and as I already mentioned earlier, I adore Hammer the way it is right now, so I do not want Hammer to be changed for something like this to be able to exist. Following that in the B tier, we've got the Switch Axe, which, my opinion, has slightly dropped on since the last weapon tier list that I did. The main reason is, well, I think that full release slash is a neat attack. I like the offset for Switch Axe, and I still adore zero-sum discharge, of course. It just doesn't feel quite as smooth or comfortable to me as some previous iterations of the weapon. Sure, the optimal DPS being essentially just spamming full release slash doesn't help my enjoyment, but I'm trying not to judge the weapons purely on their meta-optimal combos, but on their movesets as a whole, their potential. And in that case, the Switch Axe does have a fair amount of options. It's just that a lot of the options don't really add more enjoyment to the weapon, and I can't get over the feeling that I just preferred the way that Switch Axe felt back in Iceborne, specifically. I think Wild Switch Axe is very cool, and objectively it is probably a better weapon now, I wouldn't disagree with that statement, but with this version of the weapon not being my personal favorite, I just felt that the B tier was more of a fair slot. Then finishing off our B tier, we've got the Gunlance, and this is honestly for a lot of the same reasons as Switch Axe. Gunlance has more options now than it ever has in the past. They've changed the way that shelling works in ways that make it easier to understand, they've added in extra combos, and they are all really cool, and I do genuinely think that the weapon is better designed than it has been in any previous version. However, I cannot deny that I miss Bullet Barrage from Sunbreak, but also I completely separately miss the simplicity of playing Gunlance in Iceborne as well. I don't have anything against the weapon in Wilds, and I wish all of its enjoyers all the luck in the world, but I just haven't found as much enjoyment with it as I have in prior games. But I do usually prefer Gunlance in expansions compared to base games anyways, so there's a pretty good chance that that will change in the future. Moving up to the A tier, these are the ones that I get a specific craving to hunt with if I don't use them for a while, or for some of them, not in Wilds, I just have extremely fond memories of using them. So let's start off with a funky one, the newest entry to the list, the Akuma weapon moveset. Specifically the Akuma Fist playstyle moveset that is activated through the item bar, added in Wilds, and this is of course funky as all hell, but I absolutely adore using it. The only reason it isn't higher up for me is because it just feels a little bit clunky. The way that it locks you into place as you attack, the way that you only can attack directly forwards, and the fact that it's obviously an item that you have to interact with through the item bar instead of just being a piece of equipment that changes your attack inputs. I recognize part of this is to make it match the feeling of playing Street Fighter as opposed to Monster Hunter, but if they Monster Hunterized it a little little bit more. They made the movement more in line with the other weapons. I could easily see this moving into an even higher tier for me. I love the idea of fist weapons in Monster Hunter. Just punching monsters is awesome, kicking monsters is awesome, and the animations for it are sick. And I love the way that you can combo all the things together in really interesting ways. I fully recognize, just from a design standpoint, this isn't as good as the actual proper weapon types that I put below it on the list, but this is a tier list of my enjoyment and my opinions, and I love this way of playing the game, as silly as it is. After that, continuing the A tier, we've got another weapon that is not in Wilds, which is the Magnet Spike. This is originally from Monster Hunter Frontier, the balls to the wall MMO entry in the series, and it matches the energy of that game perfectly. This weapon was added to that game at a point of power scaling where the monsters were insanely quick and had just entire arena zone spanning AoE attacks that could one-shot you if you messed it up even a little bit. It's hard to explain the feeling of playing this weapon to people who haven't experienced the combat of Frontier at that stage of progression, because it looks absolutely batshit crazy when you see me using it, but the Magnet Spike's pace matches the monsters of Frontier that existed at that time. It isn't that crazy when you compare it to what you're fighting with it. It has the greatest mobility that any weapon in the series has ever had, even the extreme styles in Frontier. You can push and pull magnetically off of your target or into your target and to any specific part of its body that you apply the mark to. And there are just so many iframes and so many different animations for the weapon that make it just such a great defensive option to use as well. It is so hard to actually take damage if you play it purposefully. There's nothing like playing Magnet Spike in the series, but at the same time, I wouldn't really want it to come to the main series. I don't really want it to return, because for Magnet Spike to exist in a game like Monster Hunter Wilds, for example, without just being bonkers, overpowered, broken, and feeling really out of place, they would have to change how the weapon works on a base level. They would have to completely redesign it, and at that point, it just wouldn't really be Magnet Spike anymore. So I really enjoyed experiencing it in Frontier. I think it was a lot of fun, and I think it's also fine to not return, which is a perfect A tier ranking for me. Next up then, let's talk Charge Blade. I love Power Axe mode in Wilds and the way that it functions in general. I am really happy to see the developers trying to give Super Amped Element Discharge a playstyle specific to itself and a niche alongside it, rather than just making either Power Axe or Super Amped Element Discharge the stronger than the other, always consistently. Instead, they're trying to put it in a place where each one has a really good playstyle option to use it, one of them being more raw focused, one of them being more element focused, and I like that in general. Overall, I think the weapon is in the best place it has ever been. Nothing really negative to say about it here. I simply like the weapons that I have above it on the tier list even more. After that then, we've got Dual Blades, and the more I've played Dual Blades in Wilds, the more I have enjoyed them. Demon Boost mode and the Perfect Evade and Screw Slicer system in general feel great, and this is basically just taking something that was a Wirebug skill in Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak and turning it into a full-fledged part of the moveset for Wilds, and it's really impactful on the gameplay in general. They've also made Blade Dance feel way better, way more meaningful, and especially with the changes in the most recent patch to give Dual Blades the spiral slash animation as a secondary option for ending their focus strike, it has just made them feel even better. It's an easy A tier weapon for me. Moving on within this tier, we've got the bow, and this is one that I haven't played as much as some of the other weapons on this list, but I do really enjoy it when I do. The main sort of regular bow playstyle with spread shots and dashing around is fun, and it's cool, and it's honestly just not my personal cup of tea. I love Dragon Piercer. I love that you can build around it entirely, even though it was stronger at release of the game before they nerfed it, and I love Thousand Dragons and the fact that you can fully build around that as well, and I love that Thousand Dragons is actually so good now that it's part of like the optimal damage combo as like a finishing move. I've always thought that bow did need a sort of finishing move on its combos, and I find the new way that they've done the coding system and the discerning dodge system in Monster Hunter Wilds to be a really solid set of changes for the weapon as a whole. Not to mention the like jumping shot that looks right out of Lord of the Rings. Big improvements in Wilds all around. I just, again, prefer the weapons I have above it even more. Then we've got our final A tier weapon and our last weapon that isn't in Wilds, the Tonfas. These are also from Monster Hunter Frontier, like the Magnet Spike, but are from a much earlier time period in the game's existence. The main thing taken away from the weapon, in my opinion, is that it's just incredibly complex, but that complexity also comes with a lot of cool things that it can do. It is heavily based on movement and a lot of monster pattern, animation, and even hit zone knowledge, because you can swap between two different combat modes in general. Long mode has one moveset, short mode has another moveset, and both of these do blunt damage as their damage type, but the coolest part of the weapon arguably is that short mode flips the hit zones, meaning spots on the monster that would normally be hard are soft, spots that would normally be soft are hard. So let's say that you want to break the horn of a monster, but it's a monster with a really thick head. It would normally have gray numbers if you hit them in a game that had damage numbers when hitting the head in that type of deal. If you had Tonfas, you could just swap modes to short mode, and then you could do good damage to the head. Break the horn, simple as that. The weapon has the speed of dual blades and has aerial attacks that rival insect glaive's aerial moveset too. It had a mechanic where you'd build up a debuff against a specific monster part the more that you attack it, and then you could do a special finisher attack on that spot once you got the amount of build-up needed. And right now, as I'm running this out, I'm realizing that that is essentially what the entire wound and focus strike mechanic is inside of Monster Hunter Wilds. It's basically straight from the Tonfa moveset, but applied to every weapon. That's it. The weapon is sick. I would love more blunt weapons in the series, and I think that even today, it would still fit a niche enough spot in the weapon roster that you could bring Tonfas in without too many changes, and it wouldn't invalidate anything else if it was brought back to the main series. Now we move on to the S tier. These are all weapons that I consider to be some of the best of the best. Awesome movesets, multiple playstyle options, smooth gameplay, and every one of them is in my frequent use rotation, except for one, but there's a reason for that. First up though, let's talk longsword. In my initial weapon tier list for Monster Hunter Wilds, I had played a bit of longsword, but not like a massive amount, and my main issue was that the meta playstyle used like 5% of the weapon's moveset. It didn't use Helmbreaker or the cool new follow-up for that attack, it barely used the new spirit combo moves and the fun new red spirit gauge mechanics in general, and I just found that disappointing. The more that I've played longsword in Wilds though, the more that I've realized it's not like unplayable to just use Helmbreaker if you prefer doing that, and as someone who does prefer that playstyle, the more that I started to just say screw the meta, screw the optimal combos, and just play the weapon the way that I found it fun, the more enjoyment that I've found. Longsword in Wilds has a lot of the best parts of previous versions of the weapon, and then even more cool parts that were added on top, and I think it is absolutely an S tier weapon right now. Next up, we've got a hunting horn, and this may surprise people that it's not in the S+ tier for me, but I've just had less of an urge to play it over the last few months, and I actually know exactly why. The weapon is in a great place. I think it's objectively the best version of hunting horn that has ever existed, especially as it is relatively faithful to the initial vision for the weapon too. It's just an evolved version of it. I think it's one of the best designed weapons in the game in general. It's extremely interesting and unique and intriguing, and they keep on buffing it numerically to make it even better. Recently, they even gave the hilt stab attack a hyper armor effect, which is just awesome for the gameplay. As for why it's one tier down for me from what it was earlier in Wilds, why I've been using it a little bit less over time, it's mostly just because I've realized that my personal favorite version of hunting horn was in Monster Hunter Rise. Not even in the Sunbreak expansion, but the base game Monster Hunter Rise specifically. The pace of hunting horn and the way that the iframes and hyper armor all worked in that game felt so natural and comfortable to me, and I loved it. And while I can appreciate this newer version of hunting horn is objectively better in pretty much every regard, it's just not the version of hunting horn that's closest to my heart. After that, we've got Insect Glaive, and this weapon is in a fantastic spot right now. I love Rising Spiral Slash and Descending Thrust, I love the Kinsect options in Wilds, and I love the just sort of general flow of Insect Glaive in general. It feels awesome to me in its current version, outside of some like minor control scheme issues, of course, that everyone knows about, and the only thing that would make me like it more is if the aerial style gameplay was closer balanced to the ground style gameplay. For the most part in this tier list, I'm trying to not judge a weapon purely by its optimal combos, but as this is something that has been going on for multiple generations of the weapon's existence, pretty much the entire time, I am still just the slightest bit disappointed that aerial Insect Glaive isn't stronger. It's one of the most unique options the weapon has, one of the most unique parts of it, and one of the visually most interesting things you can do in the series, but it just doesn't make logical sense to use aerial style Insect Glaive on repeat in comparison to the grounded moveset with the way things are. Then finally for the S tier, we have the Greatsword. This is the only weapon on this tier that I do not play frequently, and the main reason is that it's Josh's weapon. I love Greatsword. I have always held a lot of respect for the weapon, and every once in a while I do allow myself a little bit of a treat and do a Greatsword Hunt or two, and while it's far from my main weapon personally, it's one that I really enjoy every time that I use it. It's a weapon built on pure raw satisfaction of big numbers, big hits, and absolutely massive hit weight and hit stop as you carve through the monster to make every single attack you do feel like you're trying to chop off a limb. If we're talking power fantasy and the idea of a weapon that makes you feel like a badass and like an actual hunter, there's nothing that really compares in my mind. But there are still a couple of weapons that I prefer on a personal level. The first of which we talked about earlier already, as I knew it would be pretty obvious, and the second S+ tier weapon is the sword and shield. This shot up my ranks significantly going into Monster Hunter Wilds, and it has stayed there even now. They nerfed the guard slash spam for perfect guard mechanic, they nerfed the counter slash damage, they nerfed the iframes on the sliding slash, and yet I still feel as if this is just the most comfortable weapon to fight with in the entire game. People underestimate sword and shield because it looks simple from the outside when you're watching someone else play it, and the basic moveset of the weapon is pretty simple, sure, but there is a lot of depth and flow to the decision making while you are using it that you can only really understand once you know what each part of the moveset is used for, and I cannot express how unbelievably safe and comfortable I feel while I have a sword and shield in my hands against even the toughest of monsters in the game. The perfect guard mechanic feels incredible to use on this weapon, and on a weapon that generally has very short attack animations, you can change into guarding with very little warning. It has a lot of movement ability so you can stick to the monster as you're attacking, and it has a lot of potential for elemental synergy as well. It doesn't have as many of those moments of pure satisfaction as like a good offset chain while using hammer, but my enjoyment of using sword and shield over the course of a full hunt is pretty much equal to using hammer. And while hammer, I sometimes feel a little bit guilty when I'm using it in hard hunts because I know I might die, I might cart along the way while trying to do something cool and committing too hard. Sword and shield, on the other hand, makes me feel like a reliable hunter who will never let the squad down. And that just about does it for today then, everyone. My full tier list of every weapon type in the Monster Hunter series, now that we are around 6 months into Monster Hunter Wilds. Quite a few of my opinions have changed since my initial Wilds weapon tier list that I made, and I of course wanted to move in and rank the weapons from spin-offs as well, and things like Prowler mode and the new Akuma playstyle too. So it felt like the right time to revisit this idea. I hope you've all enjoyed the video then, whether you agree with my personal rankings or not, and of course feel free to tell me why your favorite weapon is the best in the series down in the comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.